Night fell over the Yoda farm with a thickness that felt unnatural, as though the darkness had weight, had shape, had purpose. And while most nights in Lancaster County were bathed in gentle moonlight or the soft flicker of lanterns behind curtained windows, this night arrived like a closed door, sudden and final, the stars obscured by clouds that twisted unnaturally in the sky above, casting no light on the house where the family huddled in uneasy silence, each member sensing in their own way that something had shifted. Miriam, stirring broth over the stove, felt it in the trembling of her spoon. Eli, lying awake on the thin straw mattress, felt it in the pressure behind his eyes, as though something were watching him through the walls. Ruth, clutching the family Bible tighter than usual, felt it in the way her shadow moved, slightly out of sync with her gestures. A delay too brief to trust, but too distinct to dismiss. Jonas, normally so withdrawn, found himself pacing his room, unable to explain why the barn outside seemed somehow farther away than it had the day before, as though the world itself was stretching, distorting, subtly pulling apart at the seams. Esther and Naomi, sharing their small bed beneath a patchwork quilt, whispered nervously of dreams they hadn't yet had, memories they hadn't lived, and a cold voice that spoke to them from beneath the floorboards, telling them things no child should know, like how the roots below the foundation were older than any tree, older than the forest itself, and how those roots were hungry, waiting, remembering the blood that once soaked into the earth beneath a different house, a different time, long before the Yodas had ever arrived on this land. And in the attic, where the ceiling bowed slightly and the corners were thick with dust and silence, Abraham stood alone, candle in hand, gazing at the strange symbol he had found etched into the wooden beam above the narrow window, a symbol he had never seen before and could not explain, circular and spiraling inward like an eye that had been closed for centuries and was now, ever so slowly, beginning to open. And though he had tried to scrub it away with vinegar and prayer, it remained, carved deep into the grain, untouched by time or effort, a mark of something ancient and watching. As he stared at it, heart pounding and hands trembling, a sudden gust of wind slammed against the house hard enough to rattle the windows and extinguish the candle in his hand, plunging him into darkness so complete that for a moment he thought he had gone blind, and in that darkness he heard it again, the voice he had not heard since he was a boy, the low, echoing whisper that seemed to rise from the very floor, speaking in a tongue that wasn't English, wasn't German, wasn't anything human, a sound like roots growing through bone, and before he could move or scream or even pray, it was gone, leaving only the sound of his own ragged breathing and the cold realization that he had not imagined it, not then and not now, that the thing in the woods had never truly left, only waited, only watched, only listened, and now it was ready. Downstairs, the lamp in the kitchen flickered and died, and Miriam stood frozen, wooden spoon in hand, as the smell of smoke filled the room despite no fire being lit, a thick, choking scent of burnt soil and old rot that made her gag and stumble back, only to find that the back door had blown open despite being bolted, and beyond it lay not the back porch she had swept that morning, but something else, a yawning void of darkness filled with the faint outlines of twisted trees and glowing eyes, a forest that should not have been there, could not have been there, and yet was. She slammed the door shut and bolted it again, but the cold remained, seeping into her bones, and she turned to find Naomi standing behind her, eyes wide, hand outstretched, pointing toward the cellar door, which was now creaking open on its own as if summoned from below by something with no name. and Miriam, summoning every ounce of strength she had, scooped the child into her arms and ran upstairs to wake Abraham, but found him already descending the stairs, face pale, sweat glistening. On his brow, muttering prayers half-formed and scattered, clutching his Bible in one hand and a rusted key in the other, the key to the family's storm cellar, which hadn't been opened in 20 years. Not since the last time Abraham had heard the voice, and he looked at Miriam with wide eyes and said only, "It's awake," before pushing past her and heading to the cellar door, calling for the children to gather, calling for them all to come down into the earth with him, to hide, to pray, to wait for what he did not know, only that the air had changed. The house itself groaned as if in pain, and something was moving through the woods that surrounded them, something large and slow and utterly silent. And when Ruth asked why they were going below, Abraham simply said, "Because the forest wants us now, and I won't give it what it came for." The children came one by one, bleary-eyed and frightened, their bare feet padding softly against the wooden floorboards that now felt colder than stone, the walls of the house creaking with each gust of wind as though protesting the movement inside. And while Miriam tried to keep them calm, smoothing hair and whispering familiar prayers, her own heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear her own voice, because deep within her, a primal certainty had begun to bloom. This was not just a storm, not just a night of eerie coincidence, but something older, something final, like a closing door on a chapter no one remembered writing. And as Abraham unlocked the old iron door to the storm cellar beneath the kitchen with the rusted key-tits click echoing like a gunshot in the stillness, Ruth whispered that she had seen someone standing in the field, not far from the scarecrow, but taller, much taller, and when she looked away for a moment, it was gone, though the scarecrow's head now tilted in a way it hadn't before, as if watching the house with its stitched grin, and no one believed her until Eli, bringing up the rear, confirmed he had seen it too, not once but twice in the last 3 days, and had said nothing out of fear of being mocked, but now there, silence folded around them like a shroud as Abraham swung open the heavy door to reveal the narrow staircase descending into the blackness below, lit only by the faint orange glow of the single lantern he carried. And one by one the family descended, ducking beneath cobwebs and ducking their heads beneath the low beams until they reached the cold-packed earth of the cellar floor, where shelves lined with dusty preserves and old tools cast looming shadows, and the air smelled of mildew and forgotten time. They huddled there, unsure what they were hiding from, but too afraid to ask, while above them the wind screamed louder, and the house groaned again, not with age, but with pressure, as though something immense had settled on the roof and was slowly breathing in and out, each exhale rattling the very nails in the beams. And then, just as Abraham closed the cellar door and bolted it from inside, there came a sound so alien and unnatural that it froze them all in place, mouths parted, hearts clenched, the sound of wood bending, breaking, splintering, not like a fallen tree or storm-snatched branch, but slower, more deliberate, like something large forcing its way through the very walls of the house. And then footsteps above them, impossibly heavy, impossibly slow, crossing the floor with precision, as if the thing knew exactly where each of them had slept, as if it had studied them, night after night from the edge of the trees, and was now pacing their rooms, testing the strength of the boards, the scent of their pillows, the weight of the silence they had left behind, and no one dared to speak, to breathe too loudly, to pray aloud. For even young Naomi seemed to understand that sound was a beacon and fear its signal. And so they sat in the darkness, clutching one another, waiting, listening, while the thing above moved from room to room with methodical, unnatural grace, pausing only once right above their heads, where the floor creaked slowly, heavily, deliberately, as if it was sniffing them out, as if it already knew they were there, and was simply deciding whether or not to finish what it had come for. Minutes passed like hours, until finally the sound receded back across the floor, back through the house, and out the back door, which slammed shut with such force that dust rained from the cellar beams, and Jonas let out a whimper he couldn't hold in, drawing a sharp glance from Abraham, but nothing more, because even the father now realized what they all did, that this was not a test of faith or strength, but of endurance, of how long they could remain unseen, unheard, unnoticed by whatever walked the land above. And when the silence settled in again, deeper and darker than before, Abraham finally spoke, barely above a whisper, recounting for the first time the tale he had buried since childhood, the day he wandered too far into the forest chasing a rabbit, the way the trees had shifted behind him like they were alive, closing the path he thought he knew, and how he stumbled into a clearing where there was no wind, no sound, no birds, just a ring of stones covered in symbols like the one in the attic. And in the center stood something that defied logic, tall and root-like, its limbs both bark and flesh, and its eyes, if they could be called eyes, burned without flame, seeing not his face but his blood, his future, his legacy. And it had spoken, not in words but in a deep pulse that vibrated through his bones, and told him,